So I'd like to begin. You'll recall that, I guess it was yesterday morning, we had a photograph taken of people from cities that either have 100% renewable energy goals or cities that are cities of any size that are working on them. Because we know there's a number of cities and towns represented here where that's a matter of active discussion in council or debate. So these are the folks who are at the leading edge or wanting to get to the leading edge of the 100% renewable energy movement. So I'd be interested in hearing a comment from anybody who falls into that category about something that you've learned that you want to share with the rest of the room about that challenge of reaching 100% RE, because you're close to making that commitment. Do I see somebody who can comment? And I'm going to put the City of Vancouver person on the spot if I don't see somebody else. Okay, Andrea. Sorry, but you're our go-to person for this. Keen's coming with the mic.
Well, so I think what really struck me from the panel, and I've only met one of the people on the panel that I was moderating before, was how similar all of our experience had been, even though like you were spanning from the 80s and 90s and the 2000s and the 2100 or 2010, sorry. Yep. Just this idea that the worse our national governments get, the more important it was to act, and that the way we act is by bringing residents and businesses and others together, and that's what's allowed us to be successful, that we never even thought about what might hold us back as cities, and it's allowed us to really drive the nation rather than have the nation drive us.
That's great. So I'm not going to attempt to summarize what people say because that's going to chew up time and you'll hear too much from me. I just came from facilitating a group, though, where we were thinking about how does municipalities work at the provincial or state level. And that conversation took an interesting turn into reflecting that in any province or state or region, you've got cities that want to be leaders and others that are called laggards or simply don't feel that they've got that level of ambition yet to be able to step up and embrace the kind of be at the leading edge that I think everybody in this room. So some of you represent those kind of communities or you know them very well. And I'd like to take a comment from somebody who represents. You've come here, you want to engage, but you know your community isn't ready to be up on this stage yet. What have you learned that you think you'd want to take home and share with people? I'm looking for a comment. Great. Right here, lady with blonde hair.
I come from just across the water in West Vancouver, and
not one of the more impoverished communities in this province.
Well, you know, once upon a time I had to embarrass them into the Blue Box program to take a leap of faith. And after having 2 dumpsters filled with recyclables from the community of the school, which I had delivered to the parking lot, and it took such a short time for it to be filled. So I do have some proving history that I hope I can continue to bring to this next issue of making that 100% renewable commitment. And what I learned mostly, I think that comes foremost to mind for me, is to not think in pilot project timelines, but to know that, okay, when we learn whatever we do at the pilot project stage, that the long range is the 100% renewable, and to make that really clear with the community.
Sorry, can you give us your name?
Lucinda Jones.
Lucinda, thanks very much. So one way of interpreting that, I said I wouldn't do it, I'm now violating that, is that's a question about scaling up. I hope we can come back to that. Arjun, I'm going to put you on the spot. You were very eloquent coming from Kamloops about the kind of communities I just described. Maybe you can... no, I didn't say you were a laggard, but you know some laggards. So tell us about them.
Well, I thank you, Michael, for doing that. So I'm from Kamloops. I'm a city councillor there. I'm also chair of the UBCM Environment Committee. We come from a part of the province where we like pipelines, especially Kinder Morgan. And I think part of that is around the notion of so much of our resource extraction kind of background, our history around that being a very job providing, job providing for us. The other issue is one of trying to understand how, in a more rural context, to do things around density and transit, and just trying to work on renewable energy, just generally speaking, because we're so steeped in the natural resource extraction kind of world. And I was talking about the notion of when I came here in 2015, one of the greatest happy things that I found out was that the economy and environment are now much more aligned. And we can make economic arguments and make arguments around vibrant communities that don't have to do anything with the word environment. And that's really powerful, I think, for a lot of us in terms of making the argument to our regional people around the climate action and not calling it that, but moving forward to the same kind of goals. So I think that when you look at the ability for us to electrify, the ability for us to sort of get to other energy sources, it is something that's economically viable now, which is pretty powerful for us.
Great. Thank you very much. I'd like to take a comment or two more from people who represent smaller communities. David, I'll come to you because we're going to go to bigger cities, and Ottawa does constitute a big city, although it may have a small city mentality, he says, as a former Ottawa resident. But we have lots of people from communities that are smaller towns or smaller cities, and you've been well represented here. We may not have heard up on this plenary stage so much from you. Observation, but a learning that any of you want to take back. Great. Over there, gentleman with raised his hand. Aretha?
Andrew Stevens. I'm a first-time city councillor in the city of Regina. And as many of you know, Saskatchewan really is a fossil fuel, resource extraction-based economy and mentality. And I guess to the point about laggards, and I think there was a pretty rich discussion about whether or not we should use that word, and I agree. My council colleague Joel Murray, who is also here, also a full first-time councillor, as I've mentioned this in a couple of sessions, we were actually crafting a motion for city council as people were speaking, and I think the most important thing, thanks. I think the most important thing that we learned is that cities can do this, and they have been doing it for decades. And despite what the title of this conference suggests, Renewable Cities, when I came here, I figured that cities will always be subordinate to the interests of a province, a state, and a federal government. But that's not the case. And I think what's really exciting about this is despite all of the challenges, regulatory pitfalls, and the differences between Vancouver, Regina, and small communities like Kamloops, is it's being done. And that we can't and we shouldn't wait for provincial leadership. And in fact, I think this is an opportunity, especially in Saskatchewan, where there's an attitude that cities are subordinate to the whims of the seat of power in Regina, is that we should actually take leadership on this. And perhaps the messaging doesn't have to be about opposing refineries and opposing pipelines, but instead shift it around and say we're actually just going to build a renewable city. And we can build industries and capabilities around that. I think what was also interesting is that it also ties into, if you will, the bread and butter and the bottom line of a city, and that is development. Planning, how people live their lives, how they get around cities. So it doesn't have to deviate and think, well, all of a sudden we're getting into uncharted territory. How do you accept and how do you build greenfield sprawl? How do you fund a public transportation system? So there's a lot of exciting opportunities. So it's an opportunity actually to expand on what cities currently do and to just go back and reflect on how we design, how we plan, how we orient around green energy, building codes, and so on. So I think overall it was very exciting to see that we could actually do this. And there's a lot of inspiration I took, at least, from all the panels. It was an excellent opportunity. I hope to be here again in a couple of years.
Great. Thanks so much. Yes, we can. Luke, could I just ask one of our volunteers if you could get a third microphone so that we can... Great. So there are 3 microphones. And would you like to...
Sure.
Terrific. Please, just identify yourself.
Well, it's quite fortuitous that I'm speaking after the Regina gentleman because I'm from Saskatoon. So my name is Brenda. And, there's a couple of takeaways that I have from the event this week. And in Saskatoon, I would suggest we don't lack for ambition or aspiration. And in fact, it's quite the opposite, that being located within the province that we are, we often feel we have this head-snapping effect of having moved out aspirationally a bit too far, only to have be reined back in that it's really not our role or not our jurisdiction, and that our community can be quite divided. So I would say one of the two big things that are my takeaways here is to keep dreaming. I really did like learning about the disruptive technologies and the trends that are showing that to be aspirational is actually just part of a new normal, and so to keep on. Mm-hmm. And I think also more importantly that we probably have in Saskatoon been a little too insular. Maybe it's been a turtling effect to protect ourselves. I'm not sure, but I'm worried that we've held ourselves back by being not as networked as we should be, and so I really appreciate learning about some of the network support opportunities that are available and starting to emerge in our country, and really look forward to engaging.
Thanks so much. And I just learned a new word, a turtling effect. I've not heard that before, but thanks for sharing that too. I'll go to David Chernyshenko. And David, you're going to give us perspective, I know, from a city that's more than 1 million people. A surprise, I think, actually, to most people outside of Ottawa. But
yes, thank you, Michael. And I'm also going to give the perspective of someone who was here 2 years ago, was about to bring to Council a motion seeking support to adopt 100% renewable as a goal, and then to develop the strategy to do that. So I had expected to be here 2 years later on the podium boasting and showing the shiny, glossy document that Ottawa has developed. But instead, I have to say that report that was to have been done by Q4 2016 is on a track towards being done for Q4 2017, and that the mayor, and possibly, though it never even got to the vote of my colleagues, the idea that we would adopt such a bold, brassy target as 100% renewable simply didn't fly politically. However, to develop a renewable energy transition strategy, now called Energy Evolution, complete with the logo, objectives, mission, etc., is done. We are here. My colleague Riley Brockington is here with me. Marika Clark, who is the new manager of this project, is here, and even someone from Invest Ottawa as well is here. So all this to say, Ottawa is still on that journey. I probably represent one of many cities who had hoped to be further than they are yet, but has far from given up, is still trying to do it. We perhaps represent a city that, top leadership prefers to go for modest goals and check them off and say, see, we did it, than to aim for a really big one and under-deliver. And that's a political reality, and maybe there is no right and no wrong. I came here feeling like I needed to get my mojo back, that I needed the inspiration to remind me why we're doing this, and I very much got that. But I also am left with a reminder that, you know what, we may not have that comprehensive strategy. We may not have adopted that target, but around this time next year, Ottawa will finally open its light rail project, and we have phase 2 now approved, and we have funding from the federal and provincial governments for phase 2 now approved. We've built $70 million worth of cycling infrastructure, and I can go on through the list of projects that we have initiated and completed or well on the way, even if we don't have the strategy. So I guess in a perfect world, you've got both. We don't usually live in a perfect world, and maybe that's okay that we are where we are, and just keep plugging away.
thanks so much. Just before I go to the next person, quite a few of you are standing in the back of the room. There are really lots of seats I can see because I'm standing up here. Do come forward and sit down and be able to be comfortable and join the conversation. So I'd like to go to the mayor who's sitting next to you.
Thank you very much. I'm Mike Rutan. I'm mayor of Port Alberni, which is on Vancouver Island, and it's one of our original resource extraction communities. We used to be the largest wood manufacturing center in the world, and one of the richest per capita communities in Canada. We no longer can claim that. So my takeaway from this is possible. This is the right thing to do. We make these decisions as political leaders in our communities not because we're looking for permission from senior levels of government. We're looking for senior levels of government to stand out of the way so that we can do it ourselves. It is important that we send that message to the people in our communities. Yes, it's possible. We do it not because we want to get reelected. We do it not because we want community growth. We do it because within the context of the people that choose to live in our communities, it is the right thing. And within the context of those people who are coming after us, our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, it is the right thing to do. So within the context of this province, and what we want to see as members of this provincial community, Remember, it is the right thing to do. It is good business sense, but more importantly, it is the right thing to do. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks very much. So I'm going to ask about, because that leads very well from your comment. We've had a couple of sessions on building the case for a campaign to bring citizens along, building the case that are going to carry businesses along and take them with you in terms of exercising leadership. So would people like to offer an observation about either of those? What kind of arguments are motivating citizens to join this kind of campaign, to join a renewable energy goal? What kind of arguments seem to motivate businesses to be supportive? Looking for people who've been in any of those sessions. Great.
Thank you. My name is Bonnie Leggett from the Calmal First Nation. And to kind of come off that point of it is the right thing to do, I guess our teachings is to leave things better than when you found it. So coming from the Adaptation to Climate Change Conference at the beginning of this year, I will admit I came out with a bleak outlook on life. I was wondering when we're going to drink from the punch bowl because things are a little scary. And coming into this conference and walking into this room, I was a bit, I guess, thrown off from just the sheer amount of people here who have a very similar positive energy when it comes to, wanting to leave. I guess it comes back to my basic teaching of leaving something better than when you found it. So I believe that would be an argument for citizens and businesses, just reconnecting in that way, just a more simple, baser term.
Okay, thanks very much. Aretha.
Hi, Sam Waddington. I'm a councillor in the city of Chilliwack, and we're a long way from being up on that stage. But I also look at that as a lot of opportunity. We will be a latecomer to this conversation, but in that there's a lot of learning from this room, and I think that's the inspiring part. And we continue to see global leaders in the panel this morning. For me, that's the big takeaway, is that there is always that next level, and not to get complacent. And I think Andrea had a great question, which kind of stumped the panel, because it is a poignant question. What's that next big challenge? What are those things? And so there's those mini conversations within each of the challenges we're facing, is how I kind of look at it. But there's also that next big challenge. I think we need to, as leaders in our communities, in whatever capacity that is, not just apply that kind of thinking to this conversation, but to all the things that we do, and to try to make sure that we're always innovating. And if we have that mindset, I think the future is bright. If we get complacent and think that this challenge is the last one we're going to have to face, and then it's all good, I think we're going to fall behind again.
Thanks very much. So there were several sessions about engaging the business community. We actually had 3 leaders from really big businesses up on this stage just after lunch yesterday. Those of you who've been thinking about how to engage the business community in your communities to support your municipal goals, or if you're representing private sector businesses, is there a learning that any of you would like to share under that theme? What's going to move the business community to engage? Not seeing anyone, so I'm going to actually just move. Oh, well, great. We've got a hand up there. Terrific.
Hi, Tina Lang from the City of Kamloops. I'm one of Arjun's fellow councillors. If you live in the City of Kamloops, you don't consider yourself a citizen unless you own a pickup truck. And I say that because it gives you an idea of the kind of people who live there. So to go for 100% renewable energy would be a huge jump. However, because we're a resource-based economy largely, we also have a huge university, so we can tie that in with some research for this. But because of that, we have people saying, well, City Council should be looking at better economic development. So what I see to engage the business community is that we do focus on the economic development opportunities that taking that pledge would give us. And I've heard people say it would be a bold move, a brassy move. Well, I'd have to say it's a really ballsy move, because you would have to really put yourself out there, and I would be prepared to do that. I have the belief that if you build it, they will come. In other words, if you just say, this is what we're going to do, everything else will fall in line. That people in the community, people will be drawn to the community, businesses will be drawn to the community to make it happen successfully. And I think it could happen quickly. You can check back with me in 5 years and we'll see how we're going with that.
I'm great. I see another person right there. And I'm just wondering if any of our Australian representatives are here in the room. Tom or April or Michelle. Great. So I'll go to you in a minute because they have some inspiration to offer and that'll pick up on what you've just said from Kamloops. This gentleman.
Yeah, hi. My name is Sean Cassidy with Oxygen Capital, which is a VC fund. One of the things I think that and I used to work for RBC Dominion Securities in Toronto doing government finance and municipal finance throughout Canada. One of the avenues that when you talk about engaging business, I think the most important thing is private partnerships is P3, and you have to show the merits of it. And one of the areas I think that a lot of the municipalities are weak in is understanding private equity and how private equity capital can play in that field. And if you look at some of the models that are occurring in the United States, it's fairly relevant, and I think it's not really happening to the extent in Canada. So that's something that understanding the nature of various types of financing outside of the traditional municipal financing areas.
And did you learn something here? I mean, you've worked in the field on financing for municipalities. That's going to be helpful.
Yeah, I've worked doing financing for the federal government. I used to do the debt issues for the Canada Mortgage and Housing, raised $10 billion a year, worked with Dave Dodge, who was the Government Bank of Canada, Ministry of Finance, and all the way down. So there's a hierarchy in finance in terms of understanding the value of your municipality. What's really important for either a municipality or a region or a city, and even a province at that, is to build a brand so that when you do go to the public markets, be it a municipal debenture or if you're working for if it's the GVRD or Metro Toronto or whatever, that brand is known internationally, which gives you a lower borrowing cost. And so that brand then identifies you in the investment community. So if you're looking to do a private partnership, public partnership deal, it builds inroads into the private equity community. And private equity community is a very ubiquitous, unknown area to most people in the traditional government finance area. So it's called shadow banking. And there's actually probably more money available in shadow banking than there is throughout the rest of the finance community now. So understanding how you can work with private equity, how do you engage with it? So if you look like a firm like Fortress or KKR, they have large public plays that they will look at. So you have to show some sort of the revenue stream, cash flow structure based off, a profitability factor, and then they're willing to get in, more than willing to get in. To give you an example, we did the PEI bridge way back. I think it was like in the early 90s, late 80s, and that was based on that structure. So,
great, thanks very much. And again, that touches on a scaling up question. But I'm going to go to our friend who comes from Victoria, since I asked for an Australian speaker. Introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hi everyone, my name's Rob Law from Melbourne, and it's been a really great conference to come across the world and hear so many great stories of cities taking action. I think for me, I've been reflecting a little bit about what our natural advantages are in each area, particularly in parts of Canada where you have lots of control over your utilities, or more control than we do. That's a great natural advantage that should be taken, that should hold good stead for you. And likely for Australia, I think it's the fact that we have incredibly high electricity prices at the moment, plus about 75% of the population that want more renewables. So I guess just my final thought would be understand your natural advantage and your window of opportunity and go for it. So Thank you.
So I'm going to put two people on the spot, but I'm just going to give them a heads up. One is Aaron Fitzgerald, who's walked in the room enjoying a cup of coffee. Aaron, I'd like to hear about the First Nations and remote community session, which I know you were in. Just if you can share a learning. Not right now, I'm going to give you a chance to think about it. And I'm also going to put Mary Pickering, who's looking at her phone over there, because she works for the Atmosphere Fund. And Mary thinks a lot about scaling up, and a couple of you identified that. So, but first I'm going to go to this gentleman.
My name is Nick. I'm from Portland. And take a slightly different look at the financing question. In the Northwest in general, I think we are at a point where we can't rely on national or state funding for pretty much anything. Oregon, my state, is virtually bankrupt and is selling off state agencies and things like that. And kind of in the wake of that reality and the fact that there's been a lot of divestment happening at municipal areas for fossil fuel reasons, I think municipalities should be looking into capitalizing their own municipal banks, honestly, and starting to think about ways in which Seattle, San Francisco, Portland, Vancouver can work together on sort of like regional development projects. So I think there's some motion there. It's not quite mature yet, but it's something that definitely falls in the area of sustainable infrastructure that should be accompanying this renewable energy vision.
Really interesting. Erin?
Thanks for the opportunity. So it was a really great session, and I think I'm just going to steal Betsy's takeaway, which is that even though we were talking about rural and remote settings, there's so much overlap and so much learning to be done across borders. So in this session, we had both Gwen Holdman from Alaska, and we also had Tracy Cooper over from Australia, and the commonalities were just astounding. And so one thing that I think all of us came to at the end of the session was just remembering that the technologies are very exciting. It's very exciting to talk about policy, but it really comes down to people in these communities and focusing on what we can do at a community level.
And were there some similarities? Because the communities you were talking about in that session are very small in population, many of them off-grid, remote by any definition, and usually out of the mindset of meetings like this where we're thinking about things going on between San Francisco and Vancouver and Copenhagen and Portland. So was there some connections?
Well, we were just talking about, how microgrids are everywhere, for instance.
Right.
You would think that in these remote communities that maybe there wouldn't be the best access to technology, but what in fact we're seeing is that they're at the forefront of developing a lot of these technologies, and so I think that was really exciting.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. Mary, are you okay to comment a little bit about challenges of scaling up? She's right here with it. Maritha? And then I'm going to go to Ron next. I'll give a little cue.
I'm from the Atmospheric Fund in Toronto, and I guess what I have been thinking about is it came up in a session that we had just before this conference began, and people were expressing concerns about how now that we're making our intentions plain around renewable energy or other aggressive climate reduction targets, our vested interests are going to mobilize against us, and that's going to be a real challenge. So especially in the energy sector, we already see this happening, playing out in the Canadian context. And I think maybe one of the things we can be considering there, following on some of the comments that this gentleman just made, is thinking about the money and the investors and the opportunities there. And I think cities can be playing a role in mobilizing private capital towards the low-carbon or renewable energy solutions that we're all thinking about. But that's going to take some new capacity inside cities that we don't generally have right now, and that circles around the area of sustainability finance thinking. It means we can have the people inside who can think about the sustainability file and talk to people like this investor expert over here and come up with some new ideas about how we can attract the money in order to drive forward our agenda.
Great. Thanks very much. Ron, you led a session yesterday on innovation. Innovation is something that everyone talks about, but doesn't happen so often in this space. Do you want to give us some reflections and things you'd like us to take back, as well as something you might have heard here?
Sure. So my name is Ron. I'm from Mars. Never gets old. It's actually in Toronto, so big urban innovation center. I run something called the Advanced Energy Center. We spend all our time on how do we make energy innovation get adopted faster. The theme we most often hear is if I say innovation, most people will think about technology, and it's like 20% of the problem. 80% of the problem is how do we adopt it. If we don't adopt it, it's really no point. And we spend, I'm a technology guy all my life. I now spend most of my time just talking to people. And I think I heard that theme again here. Thankfully, actually, I didn't hear that much about technology at this particular conference. I actually heard more about innovation in business models and in how do I engage a community differently and and that's actually the right place for innovation to happen. Two other observations that are I think related. One from the movie last night. I think it was very interesting, but what really struck me was the coal miners who said, why didn't the company plan better?
right? They actually felt like, we were doing all this work and you didn't do some things you could have done. You could have put scrubbers on the plant. You could have planned for this differently. And I think that's where this aspirational piece that I hear a lot in this conference, there's a lot of aspiration, 100% renewable, et cetera. But there's a tension with that. Where are we going to get to? 100% renewable with adoption, with what do you do tomorrow, next week, to show a path to that, right? And that's what I think the constituencies that people here represent really care about. I love the vision, and it's important because it shows me a path to get there, gives me something to hang on to. But if you don't show me the path to get there, the adoption path, I'm not sure it will be an illusory, and it will be something that slips away. People will be engaged for a while. So my main thing is never, never, never forget adoption.
Great. Thank you. And I took listening to the great panel, Andrea, that you moderated this morning, and these were all leading cities, with my acknowledgement, but it was Vekwe, which has been in this game for 20-plus years. They're on an adoption pathway, and it was good to hear that, and it sounds like they're able to sustain that. But if you don't think about it, pilot projects, we're all involved in pilot projects. We're all innovators in this room. But we also need to think about how do you get beyond your pilot project to other people's pilot projects and beginning to aggregate them. I'm going to name another issue, and then I'm just going to look for some other contributions that people want to make before we conclude. And the other issue is equity. We had some sessions on that. We had a panel session at the end of the day yesterday afternoon that reflected on equity issues relating to renewable energy, both in American cities and the global south. I know some of you are concerned about that. Does anyone want to offer a take-home on how do you think about equity issues as they relate to the renewable energy transition? I'm just looking to see if we have anybody who wants to share about that. We don't. So, great, we do. Terrific. Thank you so much.
Hi. So once again, Akash from Portland/Ontario. So the critical thing that we found, which seems to be a remarkably simple solution, but it just isn't implemented often enough, is that in the realm of approaching equity, the most heavily impacted communities, low-income communities and communities of color, are often approached with a very top-to-bottom approach. So their input, their experiences aren't really taken into account, and what often happens is these communities are left with this experience that the state agencies and the regulatory agencies that are supposed to be there to protect their public health and protect their livelihood are simply not going to do so because they're not just taking the time to actually sit down and listen to their experiences. So in relation to however your renewable work goes forth, whether it's in policy or transportation or public health, it's absolutely critical to go out yourself and engage marginalized communities instead of expecting them to come to you.
Great. I'll name just one. Oh, Ray. Please. No. Young man with the phone's mic's coming over to you.
Look, one thing on equity, amongst the roles I have back in Australia, I'm a board member of a company called Horizon Power, which is a government-owned utility that has responsibility for regional power in Western Australia, and that's a big place. We've got 100,000 customers spread over the size of British Columbia. One of the things we're looking at is remote Aboriginal communities and how we can service them, and one of the things that's coming through now as a consequence of the change of the economics here is that we're now looking to actually start to service those communities in a cost-effective way and in a way where some communities previously have been ruled out of service simply because the costs were too high for a handful of people and they had to look after themselves. Now we're looking to step up and look after themselves in that way. So, and that's going to bring people out of poverty, that's going to bring people into modern service. Just wanted to mention that. I guess want to add one thing which is an administrative thing because there's so many people here that are becoming active communicators, which is absolutely fabulous. And I've got to say, add to that, this conference has been absolutely brilliant in terms of that sharing of knowledge. That's been brilliant as well. So congratulations to the organisers. But on the point, a lot of those new communicators are new to Twitter, and I want to maximise your ability to get out your message on Twitter. If you start your Twitter communication with an @ and a name following that, that message only goes to that person.
Okay, so if you want to start a message with a name at the front, put a dot in front, and it will go to the whole of your Twitter community. But if it starts without the dot, it's just an @ it'll only go to that person and the people that you have in common. So your message isn't getting out as strongly. So I noticed that there's a number of folks in the room that are new to Twitter and doing it for the first time. We want everybody to be visible and heard. Make sure you do that.
Thanks so much. This is terrific. I'm now seeing various hands going up. So, gentleman next to you, Aretha.
Tom, another Australian, I'm sorry.
Great.
Tom Knockholtz
from
please.
Sydney. I asked for them.
Yeah, sure. So we've come from the community energy sector in Australia. I'm a volunteer at Pingala, a community energy group. I'm also a director at Community Power Agency. We talk about fairness and equity as being one of the major drivers for what it is that we do. And we believe that by putting communities right at the front and the centre of the energy transition, which is a fact, that we're going to deliver the fairness outcomes that we deserve. And the reason for that is communities overwhelmingly choose to build what's right for their communities and the underserved within their communities. We're also talking about faster as well, because we believe that the barriers to the energy transition happening fast enough are not technological. They're social license to operate and their political will. I particularly love the comment about federal politicians getting out of the way of the lower levels of government. I think that's spot on. And the way to solve these problems is to get communities involved and put communities at the front and centre. So community energy is all about making the energy transition happen faster and fairer, and that's really the mantra that we've got happening in Australia right now. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And Trevor and then Jose. But as the mics are going around, and just keep your hands up so that the mic runners can see you. I see a gentleman over there. We'll go to him next. I'm just going to take a little moment because I think it's appropriate to say yesterday the Federal Minister of Environment and Climate Change announced Canada's program. It's consistent with the Pan-Canadian Framework, but it's a national program for the national carbon price in order to achieve a minimum carbon price across Canada. So national governments, when they've got the right will and the right kind of backing and exercise some leadership, can set some very important context for this kind of work. And I think it's, in an era where we tend to think about bad things happening in other places, I think for the Canadians at least, I give a real, tip of my hand to the minister for achieving that, because that took that and the whole government's effort to get us to a national carbon price has taken a lot of political work and will need to be sustained. End of commercial for the national level. Trevor.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say what a great place, Vancouver. So many initiatives. Such a beautiful place. Active transportation, electric buses, all of you folks here for this. And if you'll remember back to the opening night and the challenge that I had offered to all of you in the room, based on my experience attending here 2 years ago and all the partnerships that were made, all the encouragement that could be offered, so that when I went home, I saw amazing things being done in our own community by amazing people. We could set that goal. That challenge that I offered all of you was, what difference can you make for your city, your region, over the next 3 days? And we're drawing to a close. There is all the momentum you need right here in the room. There's friendly advice on how to do Twitter right. I'll get the same lecture when I get back home and talk to my 14-year-old. But most importantly, the thanks that needs to be given for people like Michael that have never given up, and others that are here in the room that started this journey so many years ago. And we are all experiential learners, and the story that we can tell, instead of a binder of statistics that shine negative things about where the world is headed if we don't intervene. So stay positive. Tell all of the stories. Make all of the connections. I saw so much great dialogue and people passing cards back and forth. There's people that I'm going to be reaching out to in a special way and giving them encouragement and helping them be a change agent where they come from. And that's what all of you can be. So when the summaries come back from all of the breakout sessions, let that serve as a reminder. Read all of those that you weren't able to make it to, and make sure you've made contact with all the individuals and groups, universities, businesses, politicians, heaven forbid, that you need to talk to so that you can have that impact for generations. And of course, I got to get more shameless plugs in. The draft plans are available on our website at oxfordcounty.ca, and we need input from everybody. And the templates can help others. Do a lot of research. What do they call that? R&D, rip off and duplicate. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. Technologies that are old are new again. When you look at a LEED standard where rainwater is being used to flush the toilets. Wow.
Thanks very much.
And for all of you that want to learn more, come out to the International Renewable Energy Academy. And with that, I'll pass the mic to one of the pioneers in Canada. I think you said Jose was next.
Jose's
Dr.
next.
Echeverry.
And then Meredith. Great.
Thank you, Trevor. Now I don't have to talk about the International Renewable Energy Academy. So I have to thank you, Michael, Shauna, everybody else that has made this possible. Heck, I spoke about peace at the beginning, and we've been peaceful for 3 years doing this campaign, and 3 days here sharing about it. So we showed the world how it needs to get done with the technologies of peace. To your point, I'm very happy what you just told us. Carbon pricing is here, and this means lots of money that it's being accumulated on the behalf of every Canadian that pays carbon pricing. So now the question is, we need to go to Ottawa and tell what we heard here. And what I heard here is Savannah here? Savannah, are you here still or no? Savannah works here in British Columbia, providing, thanks Savannah, she gives money to First Nations renewable energy projects. And I sat with her yesterday and she told me, I say, how many projects have you funded? And she said, too little. I got way, way more applications that we can fund. And I say, how's that possible? The federal government's wealthy. And she said, yeah, we need more money. So those of you that are Canadian, would you agree that we need to ask Prime Minister Trudeau and the cabinet to put the carbon pricing money into community renewable energy projects?
Great initiative.
So show of hands if you're Canadian and you agree with that. Viva Canada. And the last thing is the mayor told us he wants to make this conference 10 times bigger. Let's make it 10 times bigger. Sorry, Michael, I know. But then we can liberate the money to bring people that need to be here, that cannot be here because they're not as lucky as we are.
Yeah.
And you heard Trevor, right? This will give you the energy you need to change the world. So let's bring the world to Vancouver next time around.
Thanks so much, Jose. I'll go to Meredith, and I think that's the last comment I'll take from the floor, unless I see an urgent waving of hands, because we need to have some closing comments. Meredith.
Well, I'm Meredith Adler. I'm from Student Energy. And so we're a global not-for-profit that works with university students around the world who are interested in energy and energy issues. And one thing I didn't hear talked about a lot at this conference, but what I would really encourage you to think about is probably one of your largest untapped resources is the youth in your community. Youth are great innovators. They're great at mobilizing. All the issues you have building trust within the 60-something population don't exist in the 18 to 24-year-old population. So I would really, really encourage you to think about how tangible youth engagement can move ahead these initiatives, because we're all doing this for the future of our planet and our countries and our communities, but they're a big part of that, but they also can be really great partners in intergenerational collaboration to move these things ahead much faster than you can move with traditional institutions. So, thank you.
Thanks so much. Important inspiration. So this slide's been up while we've been talking, and I haven't called your attention to it. In fact, that was just developed last night by my colleague Kian. That tells you who's been at this conference. So, and it gives you an idea of the breadth of the participation, which has really, I think, been critical to the richness of the discussion. We've had people working for, or from 106 different municipalities from 12 countries, 22 different provinces and states, and that word cloud gives you at least a number of the names of those cities and communities where people have been present. So I think that's a terrific indication, and that's reflective of who's in this room. So to those of you who wondered, is this a global learning forum? Of course, we could be more global, but I think we've made a good start with this participation, and I really thank absolutely everybody who's come from so many different places and regions, whether it's in smaller communities that are more distant from Vancouver in this province, or from the other side of the Pacific Ocean, or from the other hemisphere in the south, and from Europe as well. Ken, maybe we can just click on to the next couple of slides. We're now in the conclusion phase of this conference. What comes next? Well, there's a lot of things that actually are going to be coming next. For us, we'll be compiling and reading those evaluation forms, and I said this at the beginning, some more people have come in. Please do fill them out. You've heard this at every conference. There's a reason. The conference organizers need to know what they did well, where they could improve. Our sponsors and supporters need to know what impact did this have. So do fill out the forms. It'll also be available online. We'll email it to you. And then we're going to do follow-up interviews with those people who identify that they're interested in having follow-up interviews, and I think we'll reach out to some of the session leaders directly in a few weeks' time for a phone call to get a more in-depth evaluation. As I said at the beginning, outcomes and report, we try to document everything. So all of these plenary sessions have been taped, and providing the audio quality is good, you'll be able to hear audio files if you want to review them, and more importantly, if other people that you know want to listen to some of them. If people you know back home want to listen to that great panel that we had this morning from the 5 leading cities, you'll be able to hear the audio file. We will write, there has been some video taken. We'll have to see how the quality is, but at least a couple of sessions, were videotaped. I think yesterday morning, the plenary with Dr. and Mr. Amin, and then the 2 mayors was on video, so maybe that'll also go up as a video file. We then, as a team, we write outcome reports. So we follow the Chatham House Rules practice of non-attribution, but there will be a written report for every one of the workshops. We write those over the coming weeks and months. They take a while to do, but we try to document, at least capturing a sense of what's happened. There were 30 different workshops in this forum. None of you could have been in all 30, but I'm sure you're as curious as I am to know what was going on in the other 25 or 26 you weren't able to be in. So we do write those up and look for those on our website. We'll put up forward an announcement to everybody once that documentation is complete. So those are commitments that we're going to make in terms of what comes next. Many of you have talked, though, about events that you're doing, and I just want to quickly itemize them, and I'm going to invite people just to email us, and I think we'll compile them and put that out as a communication to our own email list, which includes absolutely everybody here, about next steps, because we are just part of a continuum. But from memory, among the things that we've heard about, and I'll try to put them in chronological order, there is going to be, I know there's going to be another meeting of the dialogue that we held with North American partners among cities interested in North American 100% renewable energy. That's being planned in Colorado in late July. In September, ICLEI Canada is having its national conference, and that's going to happen in Victoria. Important opportunity for ICLEI members and any municipalities in Canada that want to engage on these issues in Victoria. In October, the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, the number of participants are members of that network, 160 cities and towns from Canada and the United States. They're meeting this year in San Diego, which was a very strong participant in this year's forum, and it's 100% RE city. So that's going to be an important moment to reflect on some of the issues that we've discussed about. In November will be COP23. A few of you have been to those. I've had a chance to go the last 2 years. That's a place in the international stage. You saw the photographs. You heard from the 2 mayors who played a really critical role, both of them, in COP21. Well, the voice of mayors and municipalities continues to be heard. Big city mayors tend to, obviously dominate, but one of the great things is that there's also increasingly representation and opportunities from representatives of local governments from smaller communities and smaller towns, because it really is a collective effort. So that will be an important step. And then going into next year, I know in March, our colleagues in Edmonton are holding an important conference on climate science for cities that's sponsored by the IPCC. First time that's ever been done. That's the first week of March, if I have that correct, Mark. And then I think it's in June of next year in Montreal, the ICLEI World Congress, which happens every 3 years. It'll be an important gathering. And that's just the ones that I've heard about over the last couple of days. So if there are other important gatherings that are for next steps that you'd like everyone to know, by all means, just send us an email. We'll compile them and put that list forward. There are many more events that I haven't even touched on. But we are part of a movement, and it's got many steps on that road. And I look forward to those opportunities to engage and having you to engage with each other and spread some of the ideas that you've learned here. So I think we're coming to a close. I should thank our sponsors. Maybe we can have that slide come back up, and I'll name them again. The North Growth Foundation, the Sitka Foundation, Natural Resources Canada, and Simon Fraser University were a core to our program to enabling us to do what we do. For this particular forum, we've had indispensable support from the City of Vancouver, the Pacific Institute for Climate Solutions, TD Bank, the Consulate General of the United States here in Vancouver, Van City, the Real Estate Foundation, British Columbia, Sustainability Solutions Group, Moby Shaw, Carbon Offsetters, and Bullfrog Power. Can we have a round of applause for all of our sponsors? I'd like my colleagues from Renewable Cities to stand up because I can't see you, and I wouldn't be surprised if more than one of you is outside the room working. But if and I'll just name you, Kian and Angela are there. Catherine, you're there. Is Betsy in the room? Great. Please come forward. Could you come onto the stage? Please. These are the people that have brought you this event and have worked for more than a year to make it happen. So I wanted to make sure that I'm sure you've met them individually, but I wanted to have you see them as a group. And I can't express too much my profound thanks for your commitment, hard work, and how relieved we're all going to be now that this has come to an end. I'll also mention our volunteers, and for those volunteers who are in the room, we'd like to have a group photo. Please stand up, the volunteers. Terrific. Thank you.